Hello everybody, I'm Master Wabbit, and let's finish off Pyre. Previously, we did the final liberation rites, we set Bertrude up for freedom, but some Deus Ex Machina nonsense happened, and we, the reader, managed to escape. So, there are a lot of characters that have been left in the downside, brought back. We're going to start with Hedwyn here. After his liberation, Hedwyn was instrumental in the events leading to the fall of the Commonwealth and was vital to the outcome of the plan. The peaceful outcome of the scribe's return was attributed to several key factors. One of them was the underlying ambition of the plan itself. The scribe's return, inspired by the liberated exiles, the people of the Commonwealth demanded new leadership. Cast yourselves down! Cast yourselves down! Chant from the scribe's return. Another was Hedwyn's visibility among the people in the streets. Identified to be a liberated exile, he was believed to be Gall Gonathanian reborn. More importantly, however, was that one of the winged harps of the High-Wing remnants accompanied him. She was later identified as Fikani Shang. A harp from whom Hedwyn cared deeply, they were separated when Hedwyn was exiled. Their bond was symbolic of what was at stake that night, and proved vital to the peace that followed. In all his days as a leader in the Saurian Union, Hedwyn oft confided in his friend Jodariel. Our nation formed in 839 AS after the fall of the Commonwealth. One day we all may stand shoulder to shoulder with a common cause. Volfred Sandalwood. Despite her intense manner, there was no one whom he trusted more in times when circumspection was required. Hedwyn would often think back about the vow he made at the beginning of his quest for freedom. Although he cherished all the friendships he made, he had pledged to Jodariel, Rookie Greentail, and the reader of the Nightwings that they might all be free again, together. You, the reader, you were once an exile sentenced to life in the downside. Now you are free. Once merely the status of a deviant, yet now a revered title in the Saurian Union. His promise had come to pass, though he always knew that this was not his own doing. He was always deeply grateful to the other three, his closest friends. While the others who stood with the Nightwings were not all able to remain in contact thus, Hedwyn thought of each of them often, and so in turn did they ought think of him. Tizo, who was left behind. Once the rites had ended, the imp Tizo had a job to do, quite unlike most exiles trapped forever in the downside. The lone minstrel asked that he watch over the Black Wagon, which the Nightwings had used extensively for travel and for shelter all throughout their quest. Tizo obliged, for he knew that wagon as well as its drive-imp inhabitants perhaps better than anyone. What became of the wagon exactly was never verified as evidence of Tizo's thorough work. After that, he liked to while away his days with any of his friends, or else with fellow imps. He would visit his friend Faye at every opportunity. She was among the few who could consistently interpret what he meant, and they were always close since first they met. Volfred Sandalwood would sometimes send him little gifts all the way from the downside. Despite the insurmountable distance between them, their friendship proved more than resilient. Tizo often missed his interactions with the reader of the Nightwings. They had quickly built quite a rapport back in the downside. Indeed, Tizo would often express wistful gratitude for all his time with the Nightwings, and their many adventures throughout the land that was always his home. Other than that, Tizo would sometimes help interpret for messenger imps relaying news to and from the Saurian Union. Despite having gained significant celebrity abroad, he never let it go to his head. And he would go fishing in the Sea of Solace at every single chance he got. Whatever happened to Rookie Greentail? After Rookie Greentail earned back his freedom, he returned to a lavish welcome ceremony in the Commonwealth, as was the tendency for liberated exiles. It was everything he could have hoped for, and soon he was well off, surrounded by luxury, and choosing between various exciting opportunities. However, he must have given in to his better judgment, as he did end up siding with Volfred Sandalwood's revolutionary forces as he promised. On the night of Scribe's return, Greentail was there with the others, inspiring the masses. He never looked prouder, the very image of Jomura Minimane himself. When dawn finally came and it became clear that the Commonwealth that everybody knew would be no more, he realized many new opportunities awaited. He began quite a lucrative career for himself, manufacturing and selling replica merchandise inspired by the downside. His main struggle was to meet demand. An aspect of his conscience cautioned him against making light of such a thing, but the money was too good, and soon his family was as well off as he always said. One of his orders of business was to seek out one of his old companions, Pamitha Thane, to whom he took a liking during their quest for freedom. They bonded further over love of drink and supported one another through uncertain times that lay in store. He also kept in close touch with Gilman, even the perfect practice partner. They would train together often, taking care to stay in tip-top shape as much as possible throughout the years. Greentail always did his best to keep in touch with all his many friends, and knew that he owed his fortunes to them. He made a special point of staying close with the group of friends he came to know so well during his time with the Nightwings, wherever they were. They shared a special understanding that put even Greentail at a loss for words. How about Faye? Kind of bounced between who left and who stayed. Long after the rites had ended, Faye admitted that she knew well before the fact that she would not be going home again. At least, she had a very strong feeling. She ended up not minding very much because she had little to return to in the Commonwealth. Her sense of home had changed. She took to wandering from one celestial landmark to the next, ever paying homage to the 8 scribes, who she believed had influenced all that transpired. She was no stranger to traveling alone, but was always happy to have company. Among her friends, she always remained close with Tizo, who, more so than anyone, could always make her laugh. Though they could not see each other any longer, Faye often thought about Jodariel and spoke to her as though she were there. Faye tried never to make a decision without first consulting her idea of what Miss Jodariel might say. One day she encountered one of her former adversaries, one called Almer Oldheart, who had served the Fate. She remembered him much more than he did her, though only just at first. Their shared experiences in the Rite and the different points of view about the scribes formed the basis of what grew to be a long-lasting relationship. Faye always was devoted to her faith, but more so to her friends. Her gentle manner and unwavering conviction often helped them brave life in the downside, both with courage and with grace. Speaking of Jodariel, after her liberation, Jodariel soon became an icon of the movement that led to the collapse of the Commonwealth and the rise of the Saurian Union. Her horns and stern countenance inspired the people to believe that she was Solium Mur, reborn. She became a great, if reluctant, leader. In the uncertain times that followed, Jodariel's seasoned expertise often came into play both in matters of security and of state. For instance, she conscripted and trained a team of volunteers in public safety. The community did not know what to make of such a cordial bunch at first, but soon came to value their service. They have stood for the people ever since, and we celebrate their founding each year. She remained close with Hedwyn all through this experience, and they supported each other through their struggles many, many times. She often had to stop herself from fearing for Faye, whom she tried to look after as much as possible in the downside. Soon she would reassure herself that Faye was very capable of surviving on her own, and in fact, she was not mistaken. She continued training on her own, a regimen that grew stricter with each passing year. There were those who sought to train with her, and she sometimes obliged. There remained one other constant in her life. She would always remember her days among the Nightwings, and with fondness, for the most part. Several exiles of the Nightwings cared more for their plan of Sandalwood than to return home from the downside. The crone called Big Bertrude was a prime example. She had found a suitable environment to live within the dismal region known as Flagging Hands. There she had built upon a thriving place of business known to many exiles in the land. With the rites having ended, she returned to her preoccupations, working away almost as though nothing had happened. When one gets to be more than 400 years of age, perhaps the even monumental events such as the culmination of the rites or the collapse of the Commonwealth are seen as trifling matters. Much of her effort was doubtless due to the influence of Sandalwood, someone whom she had admired now for decades. Though they were very far apart now, she sought out news as to his whereabouts and found his actions in the Saurian Union a rare source of inspiration. By and large, Bertrude kept focus on her work, whether casting small enchantments or imbuing talismans. The work brought her a sense of purpose, she would say. In the Commonwealth, such services were strictly forbidden, but in the downside, there was a real need for simple luxuries, which the competing slug market could not always provide. Thus did Big Bertrude continue to live up to her name, and the tales of her days with the Nightwings made her that much more the living legend. Sir Gilman! When the worm Gilman returned to the Commonwealth, he believed that he had regained something even more important than his freedom, his honor. Gilman relinquished his knighthood and declined an opportunity to serve as captain on the Blood Border. He was not interested in fighting any longer. Yet, as is sometimes the case with those such as he, a circumstance soon came about in which there came a need for him to once again make use of his military training. Thankfully, however, the scribe's return ended peacefully. Gilman was on edge throughout that night, expecting violence to erupt at any moment. But the moment never came. When the matter was at last put to rest, then Gilman truly knew his time as a knight had ended. He declared to all those in earshot that he would never fight again. Unless, of course, there arose some other extraordinary set of circumstance, again requiring him to fight, but he certainly hoped not. He still trained regularly, just in case, especially with his fleet-footed friend, Rookie Greentail. He was always grateful for the counsel of the reader, and would regale him over and over about the time they squashed the spawn of unfathomed plurns. By that point, he had long forgotten about his days under the leadership of Sir Deluge, his former commander. Breaking free of his abusive leadership was his first step towards gaining a bit of self-respect. Gilman never did return to his homeland of the Sea Dominion and was content to lead a monastic life on a small residence in the hills. It was just high up enough to make him keep striving to conquer his fear of heights. Other than that, an intense daily training regimen and the occasional visit from an old companion was more than enough to keep him optimistic and engaged. He knew by then that honor was not something to be won, but a contract with oneself to be renewed each day. What's it going to say about Sandra? After the cycle of the rites ceased turning, records of what happened to the Black Wagon of the Nightwings became inconclusive and contradictory. Some accounts suggest that the exiles of the Nightwings, who remained in the downside, continued to make use of the Black Wagon as their place of shelter and their means of travel. However, there is no record of what happened to the wagon's contents, such as the Book of Rites or the Beyonder Crystal, said to be haunted by the apparition Sandra the Unseeing. One possibility is that, when the lone minstrel took his leave, he took the Beyonder Crystal with him, for he was thus obliged. By this line of reasoning, however, the Black Wagon itself should have been taken also. Others remain skeptical that the Beyonder Crystal ever existed, or rather, that the visions that it granted were anything other than the result of an active imagination or a fever dream. The bog dwellers of the southern bogs offer still another explanation, for they are familiar with binding enchantments. If there existed such an object in which the Sisters of the Arch had been expelled for more than 800 years, then the enchantment could have expired along with the light of the stars. What this would have meant for Sandra and the Beyonders is difficult to say for certain, other than it may have meant that they were finally released. Nevertheless, the fates of Sandra and the Beyonder Crystal remain unknown. Yet those exiles of the Nightwings who claim to have seen this apparition all spoke of her with degrees of reverence, or perhaps a little fear. Can you believe this, reader? Honestly? Sandra has appeared before you, as well you can see. They are so far from the mark with all this nonsense, I am wont to laugh. In fact, here goes. She laughs. She is referring to the account of her. You sense she doesn't care for it. Well, let them gossip all they like. I merely wish that they would mention you at least in passing, when next they are at it. Though they shall never know even the half of it, shall they? Sandra seems irritated by the incomplete account of what happened to her. Reassure her, humor her, or remain silent. You know what? Let's humor her. You indicate to Sandra that the real truth of what happened between you would perhaps make what is that word? Lascivious? Lascivious? A tale to be told in such a format. She makes a bemused sound at this. Perhaps that story ought to get out then. To think that they would go to all this trouble to make literacy accepted once again, only to print such drivel. Anyway, let us keep going, lovely reader. We know the truth of it. That is what matters. She fades into the Beyonder Crystal for now, and you tuck it away. Safe. Alright. Pamitha. After regaining her freedom, Pamitha Thane found herself in a difficult position. Having once betrayed her people of the Highwing remnants, she knew that she would not be welcome in her native home. She did not trust the Commonwealth either. Instead, she found her place among Volfred Sandalwood's agents, who were busy doing their part to fulfill the plan. As it turned out, the plan was a success. Pamitha Thane stood shoulder to shoulder with her other fellow former exiles, and truly, they were a sight to behold. A disturbing rumor later spread that night, the Highwing remnants were slated to mount an assault, which for some reason never came to pass. Pamitha denied any knowledge or involvement. Afterward, Pamitha played an active part in negotiating terms between the Highwing remnants and the new nation that would become our Saurian Union. Her previous attempt at something of the sort led to her exile. She must have felt some satisfaction to succeed this time around. Sometime later, Pamitha had an unexpected run-in with Rookie Greentail, with whom she had spent a fair amount of time while traveling with the Nightwings. Under these new sets of circumstances, it turned out the two had more to talk about, and rather more in common. They would often put to the test which one was able to outdrink the other. It is unclear as to which of them prevailed in that contest in the end. One day, Pamela received an invitation to return to the High Wing Remnants, where she was to be fully pardoned. She held out a hope that she might see her blood sister Tamitha there, knowing full well that Tamitha did not regain her freedom. Tamitha did later learn that Tamitha was welcomed back by their people. However, she never responded to her blood sister's attempts to contact her. Tamitha in turn did not expect forgiveness from her at any point. Nonetheless, she kept on trying to reach out, she said, to ruffle up her feathers just a bit. Later, when asked, Tamitha Thane admitted she felt as though she had no home to call her own. This was during an interview conducted amid an extensive trip abroad, for she had traveled thousands of leagues beyond the bounds of the Saurian Union. Tamitha continued to journey thus, citing that it reminded her of when she was younger and could fly unfettered. Falconron? With the rights drawn to a close, the slug market's revenues fell precipitously, and Falconron was forced to liquidate his assets and close up shop. Yes, as is sometimes the case with those of an entrepreneurial leaning, this time of hardship led to an epiphany, or at least a sudden change of fortune. One day, Falconron had a run-in with a messenger imp bearing news from the other side. Ron gave it to one of his remaining trinkets, which could not be sold. The following week, the messenger imp returned to him bearing a tidy sum of wealth in newly minted coinage from the Saurian Union. Falconron cut a long-term deal with the messenger imp then and there. Though his trade remained a gray area from a legal standpoint in the Saurian Union, the newfound fame of the downside caused Falconron's goods to explode in popularity. He later signed an elaborate agreement with Big Bertrude's and found a distribution partner on the other side through Rookie Greentail, whose own business had expanded. Especially in the Saurian Union, Falconron's goods are still known for their superior quality, though he assumes no liability for any side effects. Volfred. When Volfred Sandalwood regained his freedom, he knew that his work had only just begun. The nation that had exiled him to life in the downside now prepared to honor him, but he was not interested in such ceremony, nor in freedom on the Commonwealth's own terms. He soon rejoined his agents, with whom he had been coordinating for years, slowly, carefully preparing for a night that soon would come. For Sandalwood and his loyalists and sympathizers, true freedom was at stake, not just theirs, but that of everyone living under the Commonwealth. He hoped to gather liberated exiles representing each of the 8 largest ethnic groups composing the population of the Commonwealth. They would stand together as a vision of the 8 scribes returned, inspiring the masses to embrace an older set of values from before the Commonwealth had tightened its grip. With the rites having ended sooner than expected, this optimal scenario became impossible, but Sandalwood did not relent and prepared to execute his plan, imperfect though it was. Volfred's ambitious plot to start a revolution in the Commonwealth as peacefully as possible. Doesn't say. We already know it succeeded, so yeah. On the night of the scribe's return, he stood as one of 6 former exiles of the Nightwings, and their voices echoed together through the streets. These former exiles, who ought to have disappeared into the ranks of the Commonwealth's own leadership, now stood united with its people, who poured from their homes in solidarity. It was imperative to Sandalwood that this stand against the Commonwealth be peaceful in its nature. An overwhelming show of popular support would be more than enough. Ensuring this was his priority that night, and in the end, the result was self-evident. The plan's goal had been achieved. Sandalwood's work far from over still. He labored ceaselessly with representatives from across the population to restore a sense of stability. This transitional period had its troubles, though none that were not quickly solved. Such was the will and spirit of the people. They understood their freedom carried new responsibility. After the Saurian Union was born the next year, Sandalwood was elected as the nation's first prime minister. It was not his intent to run for this office, but the people chose him anyway. He led our fledgling nation through its nascent years. He invited the perspective of the reader of the Nightwings at every opportunity, and counted him one of his chief advisors and most trusted friends. As Volfred Sandalwood gained more fame throughout this land for all his sacrifices and his contributions, he remained ever steadfast about 2 things. The first was that the cause itself ought to remain in focus. The freedom that the people had achieved, it was a gift to be cherished, a set of values that needed to be nurtured. The second point he made was that he himself had little to do with the outcome. He would often praise the exiles of the Nightwings who had stood with him, each in turn by name. He never forgot any of them. One day on his birthday, the people of the Saurian Union presented to him a monument depicting him and the Nightwings as imagined in their prime. It had since ensured that those of us with memories more fallible than that of Sandalwood likewise remember the achievements of his fellow former exiles and our cause. I mean, that's pretty much it for everybody on this side, except for these 2. So let's start at the bottom. Dalbert. As the cycle of the Rites drew to a close, it grew evident that a chance at freedom from the downside had forever slipped from Dalbert and Almer Oldheart's grasp. Thus, they and the exiles of the Fate returned to Jomure Valley. There they struggled to get by, as exiles of the downside tend to do. Sometime after the Rites had ended, the Oldhearts at last heard the news that the Commonwealth had fallen. This was well after the fact, of course, but it brought old Dalbert great joy. Despite his forthright manner, he had no love for the nation that cast him down along with his son. Dalbert Oldheart passed peacefully in his sleep before the next new moon. In his final days, he implored his son to undergo a pilgrimage to the scribes. Almer never shared his father's view of the scribes, but respected Dalbert's wishes, and so, after a period of mourning, Almer began a new journey. One day during his travels, he ran almost headlong into another exile after paying homage at the spring of Jomure. He was stunned to find that this was none other than the one he knew as Faye, from their days as adversaries in the Rites. Faye was overjoyed to see him, though. Almer was unable to bring himself to understand why. She likes you, genius. Eventually, of course, he did, and they remained together, growing even more accustomed to their new lives in the downside. Not a day went by that Almer Oldheart did not think about his father and give thanks to him and speak to him at morning and at night. Would that the stars yet shone, for surely Dalbert's would be there among them, smiling down at his son and watching over him and his kin. All right, the accusers. What was his name? Oh, Lendl. After the final liberation rite, Lendl refused to believe that the Rites had truly ended. He would sit through night after consecutive night, staring into the blackness of the sky, awaiting any kind of sign that he might gain another chance at freedom. No such sign ever came. His fellow accusers started to express concern for him. Survival had become their top priority once liberty had slipped from their grasp. But Lendl dismissed them as weak fools. He insisted, rather forcefully, that any evening now, the stars would shine for him again and mark the way towards his inevitable freedom. He was, of course, mistaken. The others in his triumvirate were left with little choice but to abandon him. After that, the exile known as Lendl the Liar was never seen again. However, there had since been sightings of a bedraggled demon who wanders the downside and bears Lendl's cruel countenance, suggesting he yet lives. Oh, Udmild. After the cycle of the Rites had ceased, Witch Udmild returned to the Flagging Hands region, where she sealed herself within the Pit of Melith. There, even her fellow exiles of the Withdrawn allegedly grew unnerved after a time and left her to her vile work. Sometime later, the Pit of Melith erupted into flames. So intense was the conflagration that it could be seen all the way from Jomure Valley. Arson was suspected, though the cause was never verified, and many bog dwellers in the region were forced to flee. A tempest blowing from the north finally quenched the flames. When at last the ashes settled and the grounds had cooled, the site of the fire was scarred beyond recognition. No trace of Witch Udmild could be found. As for the contents of the Pit of Melith, which notably included a profane object thought to be the remains of Islach, all of it were gone as well. Back in the Saurian Union, Udmild's repeated threats of the return of Islach were thoroughly investigated, and no credence was found to any of her claims. Sir Deluge. All his life, Sir Deluge had fled from one danger only to find himself facing another. He had escaped the war-torn waters of the Sea Dominion, he had escaped the blood border of the Commonwealth, and now he had escaped the Rites. After the Rites had ended, many exiles wrapped up in the ancient test were crestfallen, as their last chances to return to their homes vanished, along with the stars above. But Deluge did not mind, for this outcome meant that, at last, there was no burden of responsibility weighing down on him. While most of his fellow exiles of the Pyre Hearts yet longed for the waters of the Sea Dominion, driven as ever by their impulses towards conflict, Deluge settled down. Within him remained one of his companions, one Lady Seagrass, who had taken a liking to him for some reason. She is a worm knight duty-bound to serve Sir Deluge and the Pyre Hearts. Oh no. Reportedly, they disappeared into the waters of the Worm Gulf, which may begin to explain the significant increase in worm population observed in the vicinity. Yup, they banged. So, what do we got? Barker Ashpaws never had much interest in returning to the Commonwealth, for he always found its bylaws to be stifling. So when the Rites ended, he did not care, at first. He soon grew very bored. The Rites had given his life a certain sense of structure he had always needed. He missed the raw anticipation of it all. He decided to continue conducting the Rites, for the thrill of it. He bent some of the rules and replaced some of the objects, but it was close enough. His packmates, the Dissidents, proved more than happy to participate, and thus they ran against each other back in Jomure Valley. Gradually, other exiles familiar with the Rites, as well as those who had not heard of it at all, started to take an interest. They ended up giving Barker Ashpaw some healthy competition. His old feud with Rookie Geentail ceased meaning anything to him, and he forgot all about it amid his new pursuits. Ultimately, even Barker Ashpaws, who had led such a directionless existence to that point, found something of a calling through the Rites. Whether he took the Rites less seriously than any other exile of his time or more was oft debated by those who watched him work. Throughout her exile, Tabitha Thane was motivated by a single goal: to return to the Commonwealth and exact vengeance on her ancient enemies. When she realized the Rites had ended and that she would never see her mountain home again, she nonetheless remained determined to aid her people however possible. She had gathered certain information pertaining to the intentions of the Nightwings, who had formed a pact to regroup on the other side after their liberation. Other such reports exposed certain weaknesses in the Commonwealth defenses and revealed to the High-Wing remnants the opportunity for a risky but potentially impactful strike. As Tabitha could not participate in the assault, she learned what happened well after the outcome. On that night, known as the Scribe's Return, the Commonwealth had fallen. The High-Wing remnants thus prevailed at last without even having to fight. Soon after the fall of the Commonwealth, Tabitha learned her blood sister Pamitha was an accessory to the successful outcome. Tabitha was very skeptical of this, but as similar reports kept mounting, she soon accepted the prevailing opinion, however grudgingly. Once a messenger imp arrived bearing some sort of message, seemingly for Pamitha. However, Tabitha turned it away. She would not give in to an impulse to forgive. Knowing that the conflict on the other side had ended, Tabitha retreated to the crags of Black Basin and grew ever more distant. Those closest to her surmised that her inability to reconcile with her blood sister was at the heart of this, though for her part, Tabitha never once admitted to any such weakness. Alright, buddy. When Manly Tinderstoff realized the Rites had ended and that he no longer could return to the Commonwealth through this ancient means, he was outraged. He cursed the scribe, spewing forth such a slew of blasphemy as to be very unbecoming of one of his high status and bearing. When at last he calmed himself, he focused all his energies on attempting to find another means of homecoming. He maintained regular contact with his wealthy family on the other side via Messenger Imp, and used their vast resources to explore other means of escape. He tried using an elaborate pulley system. He attempted to retrofit a flying black wagon with superior propulsion. He tried an imp raft, a hot air balloon, even prayer. Nothing worked. There was only one way to escape the downside, and now it was gone. Tinderstoff bankrupted his family in these vain attempts. At last, such was his shame that he returned to the teeming woods of Black Basin, to Cinderroot. There he at wallows, complaining to his comrades of the chastity who still put up with him, either about his own misfortune or the latest news from the other side. Good riddance. Once it became clear to Ignarius that the Rites were drawing to a close, he knew that it was time for him and the Tempers to call it quits. But first he and the Tempest decided to celebrate, and that they did for many, many nights. The revelry did eventually subside. The exiles parted amicably and went their separate ways. He roamed the downside then, searching for some meaning in his life, sometimes taking odd jobs requiring his brute strength. He never remained alone for long, and took on many lovers in his time. However, he sometimes thought about the one he had called Curlyhorns and what became of her. Though his glory days as the most powerful conductor of the Rites had long since passed, he always enjoyed the fearsome reputation he had cultivated at that time. Okay, we have Celeste, Tariq. I'm very curious. What happened to Orlick? After the Shimmer Pool closed for what would be the last time, Orlick looked around him in the flickering light of the Nightwing still burning pyre. He then turned to the Fall of Solium and looked up toward the black, starless sky. He cursed the 8 scribes then, one after the other. After that he strode forward, towards the water coursing from the side of Mount Elodial, and without hesitating, he cast himself down. Orlick's body was never recovered. The drop from Mount Elodial does not appear survivable, though Orlick did survive it once. That time, however, he was filled with fury, such was the betrayal he had suffered when his fellow exile claimed his rightful freedom. This time, Orlick was filled with nothingness, and chose to leave the downside in the one way he still knew he could. The other Nightwings, who were witness to this, never forgot what they saw. So apparently, the best version of this ending with Orlick, you need to let him win in the final Rites, and then you yourself go up the Shimmer Pool or whatever. That's what I've heard. I don't have the heart to try it myself yet, but Tariq. After the cycle of the rites ceased turning, the lone minstrel bade the remaining Nightwings take the Black Wagon and seek their fortunes elsewhere in the downside. Their parting was heartfelt, but brief. He remained there at the summit of Mount Elodial with Celeste, where the two of them would chronicle the final outcome of the cycle. Neither Tariq nor Celeste were ever seen again. We know all this now through song attributed to them. Some claim these songs originated in the taverns of the Saurian Union and merely were imbued with weight of folklore. However, exiles liberated from the downside corroborate each other's claims at having met this duo that presided over the liberation rites. Another folktale suggests these minstrels were heralds of the scribes. Having fulfilled their obligations, they departed the world we know and rejoined their patrons. One of their famous songs described another, simpler outcome, that the two gave up their duties to the rites in favor of a life that they could share together. In any case, they are likely to remain the subject of such verses and songs, for it was they who watched over the rites and ushered in our times. There is one more account which warrants mention. The Nightwings conducted the rites under the guidance of a reader. Little is known of him. However, some accounts of him begin to paint a picture. We know he was of common birth, always directionless and prone to misremembering at times. Low blow there, game! The journey to the downside left him close to death. It was then that the Nightwings found him. They brought him from the brink. He showed them the path. He pressed onward with the others. He had made a vow to help his friends be free. Thus did the cycle of the rites commence its final turns. When the final rite arrived, the reader's freedom was at stake. That freedom he indeed achieved ere the morning's light. From that point on, accounts of him diverge. It is said that the voice which troubled him he never heard again. Some say he opted to retreat from public life. Though whether that is true, only he knows. Someday perhaps that the reader's own star shall emerge. Then it shall pierce the dark of night in all its brilliant glory. Until such times and ever after, all of us give thanks. And that has been Let's Play Pyre. And as much as I don't want to talk over this, I probably should, so this song is amazing. Enjoy what little you can hear of it as I talk about the project. Basically, it's going to cover what happened. Now listen carefully. We sing of the last of the Nightwings who, having broken the cycle, shall live on in song. Headwind prevailed and strode the path that his heart laid before him. He has found his way home. Found his way home. Captain Joe Dariel, mother to many. There we are. Supergiant Games. She has found her way home. And Darren Korb doing the music and sound. Logan Cunningham being the voice of the voice. Oh. These guys did an amazing job. An absolutely amazing job. This is like one of my favorite RPGs. Ashley Barrett and Darren Korb. Those are the only voices you hear, at least for singing. National Quality Assurance. So pay attention to this line. Important to note, depending on who you let go and who stays, it deliberately changes the lyrics. It's going to say remain true to the end here as well. And the next one, this one's going to find his way home because, yeah. Yeah, so I have to tip my hat to the people who... Oh, hello, Pamela. The cast in order of appearance: Jodariel, Rookie, Hedwyn, The Voice, Lendl, Faye, Falconron, Dalbert, Almer, Tizo, The Lone Minstrel, Barker. All these characters who voiced... I mean, yeah, there's a lot to love about this game, right? And I especially do love this ending, how they actually have the lyrics change depending on who gets out and who stays. Trying to program that in and make it sound right and all that, that is crazy awesome.
As the Nightwings guide, having led them to glory, he has found his way home.
Oh yeah, these two. Too bad we couldn't reunite those two. Oh, and there's just one more person you sing about, right? Yep. So I'm pretty sure that that last line, they had to record 6 separate versions for he found his way home, she found his way home, they found their way home, and also the he, she, or they remain true to the end. That is a lot of, I would say not a lot of work, but then again, that's crazy to put in the slightest. But yeah, that's been Let's Play Pyre. I sincerely hope that everyone who's watched this has enjoyed it. There's going to be one more bonus episode after this, just to cover all the things that I didn't. Namely, the multiplayer mode that's in this game, that exists. I will admit that it exists. But yeah, multiplayer. Also the added difficulty of Nightwing mode, which is, oh boy, not something I really want to do. But what an amazing game, right? We're not quite at the end of it yet. I mean, the art is absolutely beautiful, right? How amazing. And hey, I think this is what we've seen in the pause screen pretty much any time I bring it up, except it's no longer on fire. Slowly comes up, and then... But look at that, the Saurian Union. The end. So yeah, Pyre is close to being complete. There's one small episode. True Nightwings campaign mode unlocked. Press start to return to the main menu. So, On the bonus episode, we're going to be covering all the little things I didn't. And until next time, everybody, take care.